you're at work, if you're at school, if you're at home, doing all kinds of things, no matter where you are, at the end of the day, it's like 4:00, 4:30 in the afternoon. You're like, oh, I got to start thinking about supper. And if in that moment you have to think about, well, what do we have? What can I make? Oh, do I have to go to the store? Oh, what does everybody else want if you're cooking for not only yourself? Like all of those decisions and things to think about in the moment. At the end of the day, when maybe your brain is, operating on 50% power compared to what it would have been, at a different time, it's no wonder that people will be like, screw it, let's just order pizza, because I've done that before.
What would you say your your top 5 favorite kitchen hacks would be? We haven't covered them already, but what would be top 5?
Well, the first one that comes to mind for me is
Well, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of A Plate Full of Insights. And today we are so excited about our topic to be able to talk about everything around kitchen hacks. So if you are listening and you're a new person testing out the kitchen, or you're somebody who knows their way around the kitchen and looking for a few hacks, or maybe you're somebody who's listening because you don't love being in the kitchen and looking for some ways to make it a lot easier for you. So, we're going to talk a little bit about strategies that are going to touch on whatever skill level you're coming into today. So, before we get started and dive right in, we are going to introduce who we have joining with us today. My name is Andrea Shackle. I'm a registered dietitian here. And we have returning Lisa, our chef here at Revive Wellness. So, introduce yourself, Lisa.
hello. Thank you for having me again. I always have a blast on this podcast. So, as Andrea said, I'm Lisa. I am one of the chefs on the team, and I'm excited to dive into our topic today.
Awesome. And of course, last but not least, Brandon.
I'm Brandon, manager and registered dietitian at Revive. Very grateful to have Andrea host this episode instead of just having me host the episode like we usually do. So this will be a lot of fun, and I'm super stoked to have Lisa back again and talk about this topic. I feel like we can have some fun with this one.
Yeah. And I feel this is a topic that comes up a lot when we're talking with clients, or even just talking to people in general around, cooking and kitchen hacks. So to kind of lead us into this, Lisa, maybe, tell us, what is it, or why people struggle a little bit in the kitchen, or and then Brandon, we can talk even a little bit about clients, what we hear from clients as to why they struggle in the kitchen. But let's start there. What are some common struggles?
I would say the number one thing that I hear is time is a huge factor. Lots of people, most people are super busy at their jobs or with family stuff or whatever else. And then cooking is it's a time suck. It takes a lot of time if you want to cook things from scratch. So I think that's a big obstacle for people, is navigating how to use their time efficiently and how to fit that into their day. And people are tired at the end of the day, and so they just don't want to have the both mental and physical stamina to also have to think through mealtime every single day. It's like you're never going to get a break from it. Every day you have to cook for yourself and your family. So that can be mentally exhausting as much as anything. And I totally get that. So that's probably the number one thing that I hear. And I think a lot of people are just intimidated, I guess, too, in the kitchen by, if there's a technique they're not familiar with, or a spice they've never used before, or maybe a piece of equipment or a tool that they don't have. And so then they think, oh, I can't make this. And then they have to scramble and think of something else at the last minute. So I think that sort of sends people into a bit of a panic sometimes. And so that's another one that I hear a lot, is just this confidence piece and not wanting to go out of their comfort zone. So just kind of sticking with the things they know, which, by the way, is okay to do. So those are kind of the things that come up for me the most that I hear. And I'd be curious to hear what you both hear a lot from your clients and people that you talk to.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The time piece, either a lack of time, like a true lack of time, or a perceived lack of time. Because a lot of times, when I talk with clients, at least, there's a if you're wanting to improve your nutrition, you're often going to go to like, oh, healthy options that maybe take longer than what you would want them to take on an evening, or you have to cook everything from scratch, which takes more time, or you are continuously bombarded by recipes that misjudge the amount of time it takes to make the recipe. Um, One of the jokes that I talk about a lot on social media is how we are just continuously gaslit with the prep time and the cook time on a lot of recipes that are online, saying it's like takes 30 minutes, and then you're standing there going, why am I in the kitchen for an hour and a half and I still have to do dishes? So lack of time is very real for sure.
Yeah, I know, Brandon, you and I have talked a lot about that too, right? We forget amongst all the time that, oh, we still have to either maybe even add grocery shopping into that, right? Or stopping and getting stuff on top of the cleanup and the packing. And Lisa, you hit the nail on the head of we still have to cook and eat all the time. Like it's not something we can just, piece out and not do. So when we think about behavior change with my clients, we're always like, well, how much time do you actually have to give and work backwards with that? And that will really change that narrative around what's going to work in the kitchen. And I think that's probably one of the things that my clients talk to me about the most, of like this expectation or fear of like it's not correct or it's not the right way or the best way, or oh, I should be eating like something, but you know what, this is all really I had time for. So that kind of guilt of what we see it's supposed to be like, but in reality what actually it needs to be. um but I think we hit on a lot of the common struggles, definitely. So let's get into then, what do we do about this? Let's start with time, because last time I checked, we don't have time machines, and like how do we get more time? There's only we're maxed out with time in a day. So yeah, what can we say to our listeners about time hacks?
Yeah. I mean, I'm always going to talk about meal planning when it comes to time saving. That's just that comes up a lot for me. And I think a lot of people have this misconception that meal planning is going to add time to your week around meal prep and stuff, because you have to dedicate that, time to sit down and do that. But it actually is like sort of one of those, like, you invest your time up front and then save it later kind of thing. So for me, it's as much a mental thing as it is a like physical thing in the kitchen, like just not having to think about my meals for the week other than one time. So I dedicate like an hour. I do my meal planning on a Thursday, and then I get my groceries on a Friday morning, because grocery shopping, I can't handle the crowds on the weekends. So I go in the morning on a Friday when it's just me at the store. And lots of people do it like late at night too, after work or something. So yeah, doing the meal planning piece for me has changed my entire life. And it's not like, that's another thing where people think it needs to look a certain way too, where it needs to, you need to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner planned out perfectly down to every ingredient, all of your snacks, it doesn't necessarily need to be look a certain way or be that way. I will always say, if you're just new to starting with meal planning, to start with just like a couple of meals in the week and plan to do leftovers. And then that basically serves you 4 meals if you can do 2 meals out of each one. So that's a good portion of your week already, just for like a couple dinners. That's all you have to plan. Or start with something you already love, like a recipe you've made 1,000 times. You don't need to dig through thousands of recipes and go on all these websites and spend a ton of time getting creative. Just start with something that you love and maybe make a larger batch of it, and then make some leftovers. So that one is a huge one for me that saves me a ton of time. You go to the store and you're purposeful about what you know you need for your recipes. You're only buying what you need. You know what's on your list. You're not like wandering around the store thinking, okay, what should I get for this week? You're not thinking on the spot and just grabbing whatever. You're knowing exactly what you need for the week. So that saves you time in the store as well. So that's kind of a big one that I always start with, is the meal planning piece. I guess going hand in hand with that is the batch cooking piece too. I'm not huge into batch cooking in the traditional sense that people think of it, where you spent all of Sunday in the kitchen prepping 8 meals and freezing all these, and like if you're into that, that's awesome. And I totally encourage that. But that doesn't work for me personally. And that's just another way of saying like, it doesn't have to look a certain way if it doesn't work for you. But my version of batch cooking is just making a larger batch of something I'm already making and having leftovers either for that week or freezing some portions to have for a quick like lunch to take to work, or for those nights when you're running out the door having to go to activities with your kids or whatever it is. Then you have something in the freezer you can just pull out and throw in the microwave or in the oven. So that's kind of my version of batch cooking that works for me, is sort of like I'm already doing the work, I'm already making that meal. I'm just going to make a little bit more of it, kind of thing. So those two things come to mind. I'm going to let both of you chime in here before I keep going.
Yeah, I not not surprising those tips whatsoever. Like one of my clients that had an aha moment with meal planning. One of the things that they mentioned is that they didn't even do much in terms of pre-preparation, but the simple act of just thinking about what you're going to eat the day before, that the Sunday hick, you don't even have to do much work. But they, because at the end of the day, end of the work day, if you're at work, if you're at school, if you're at home doing all kinds of things, no matter where you are, at the end of the day, it's like 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the afternoon. You're like, oh, I gotta start thinking about supper. And if in that moment you have to think about, oh, what do we have? What can I make? Oh, do I have to go to the store? Oh, what does everybody else want if you're cooking for not only yourself? Like all of those decisions and things to think about in the moment. At the end of the day, when maybe your brain is, operating on 50% power compared to what it would have been, at a different time, it's no wonder that people will be like, screw it, let's just order pizza, because I've done that before. You would definitely downplay the impact of making decisions before the time comes where you have to do the things related to that decision. In this case, what am I going to have for dinner on Wednesday? Easy, easy thing to do.
Yeah, I just totally agree with that. With the time piece, especially where it's like at the end of the day, when you're tired and your brain is at 50% capacity, it feels insurmountable to me to think of something to make. And then you're looking for a recipe, you're looking how long it takes. It says 30 minutes, and really it's going to be 45 or an hour. Let's be real. The cleanup, do I have the ingredients? Do I need to go to the store? All of that process of just thinking through those pieces, that adds so much time to your day. And so I can totally understand why people would just go, I don't even want to bother at this point. I'm too tired. All those steps seem like way too much work and not worth it. So if you do that, if you front load all of that and during your meal planning time that you set aside, you don't even have to think about that at all. And that's what has happened in my life now since I've started meal planning. And it sounds like that was similar for your client that had that aha moment. Is just like, I'm done work. What's on the meal plan today? Oh, I know what I'm making. I have all the ingredients. I don't have to think about it. My recipe's ready to go. Oh, I also can look at what's on my meal plan for tomorrow and get out some meat out of the freezer to start thawing. So I don't have to do that last minute, throw it in the microwave and thaw it and hope it's like all the way thawed in time to prep. I've done that, and that's the worst. So like that kind of stuff too is getting like your head in the game even the day before. Like I've just gotten in that habit now of like, what's tomorrow? Oh, I'm going to get the chicken breasts out now and put them in the fridge on a plate. And that just saves time too, right? So I don't know. I can talk about meal planning forever.
These are all really good things, and definitely things that I echo with my clients as well. And then I'll even take it a step further of like, even before you commit to creating a meal plan and planning this out, is to take a few days of reflection of like, and noting the things that Brandon had mentioned, right? Like, when am I the most tired? When do I need this meal plan to work for me? Because sometimes you're going to have a day where you're like in the mood and just want to cook everything, right? So taking notes of kind of the patterns of, you know what, these days are always going to be busy. And, you know, I got to make sure that meal plan is going to match and reflect that versus trying to make the meal plan fit. It's got to work the other way. So kind of doing a little bit of a time management check before you know, kind of start these things. Um, I wanted to keep some more hacks on time, Lisa, because one of the things that comes with meal planning, kind of a little bit of expectation of, there seems to be this, I don't know if is it a bias or what it is around like, well, if it's a quick and easy meal that I'm planning or a kitchen hack, then it must not be balanced or it must not be good enough. Or quick and easy means, you know, not the best and I shouldn't do it. I should be, you know, roasting a full on turkey chicken at 5 o'clock, right? Like, so there's this kind of thing with quick and easy, and which it helps with time. So how do you, yeah, as a chef, what would be the hack around that?
I mean, first off, if something is quick and easy, that totally does not mean that it's not going to be balanced or delicious or just as good as something that spends where you're spending hours in the kitchen on something really complicated. So that, like, you don't need to have that in your brain at all about the quick and easy aspect. But of course, like, finding those recipes that work for you, that are those quick and easy ones you can keep returning to, and like, what about it did you like, and finding similar things in that vein. So like for me, sheet pan meals are a good example of that, where it's like very low on dishes. It's one oven temperature, one pan, you throw everything in, and maybe it's super great flavor because it sort of has those roasted flavors, but like super, super easy, very minimal prep, and probably is going to be balanced. One of the things I make a lot that's on my regular rotation is it's like a sausage and rice thing that has peppers and onions and celery and a bunch of other things in it. And literally, like, you cook the sausage, and then after that, you literally dump everything in. Like, there's nothing else to do. You dump the rice, you don't cook the veggies separate. You just, like, literally, the first time I made it, I thought, oh, this is gonna, like, the texture is gonna be a little weird because you're not cooking them in steps. Yeah, and it actually wasn't. Like, it was that's why it's made it onto my regular rotation, because it's like shockingly so good, and there's no negative effect of just dumping everything in and turning it on for 20 minutes. So like, definitely look into those types of recipes where you can just throw stuff in, or like slow cooker meals. um even using like tools like your food processor and stuff like that to help with chopping, if you're like doing a bolognese sauce or something, where you need carrots, celery, and onion. You can just throw it all in the food processor and pulse it for a couple seconds, and everything's chopped up for you like super quick. Whereas normally you'd be spending a bit more time chopping those things up small. So like, little things like that can help you along, little tools that can help. And then, yeah, just looking for those recipes that don't have, where you're not using every single burner on your stove and the oven's on, and all those things, especially in the like busy during the week. That is a mental thing as well as just like a practical thing.
Some of my favorite meals, and I tell my clients this all the time, some of my favorite meals don't even have a name. Like sausage and rice with some vegetable. Like, I haven't found a better way to describe them than whether it's a frying pan, or a sheet pan in the oven. It's a throw everything in the pan kind of meal, because that's literally what you do. And a lot of times it ends up being like some of the tastiest ones, because I kind of was in a I don't really care what this ends up looking like, because it's just going to work. I mean, you're just dumping random stuff in, and you kind of got this like, um, yeah, don't give a care, because it is what it's going to be, and it's better than what I was going to do alternatively, which was probably not much. And, you know, dig random spice combos out of the pantry, and away you go. and it works most of the time. Sometimes, you get the odd thing that ends up kind of weird, but still edible. I have yet to make something that was inedible unless I accidentally burnt it, which, let's be honest, I'm just scraping the burnt stuff off and still eating the rest. So,
It's all about experimenting and trying things.
yeah. But I do appreciate the fact that, like, that getting to that point takes time. Like, I've been in the kitchen for like a long time. I know my way around kitchen tools, and I'm not hesitant to use certain things because I know how they all, like, so that element of like stress is not much there for me, whereas it could be for some people. So I don't want to convey a sense of getting to the point of just being able to, yeah, throw everything in a pan and call it good. It may take a little bit to get to that point for some.
For sure. Yeah, and I will add that like not every recipe works like that. Like obviously there's some recipes that are like a dump in the pan and it works great, and it's somehow a miraculous result. But it's not like you can take a recipe that has all these multiple steps, like a lasagna or something, and be like, I wonder what'll happen if I just throw it all in the pan. And like obviously that's not going to work, right? So I mean, I think that goes without saying, but yeah, there are certainly a lot of recipes out there that are, especially like slow cooker or instant pot type recipes. Soups are obviously like almost no fail recipes for that, where you can just dump things in the pan and go. So that's always a good place to start for like really quick and easy stuff.
I think it's so funny that potentially we have roughly the same things on our meal plans between the 3 of us. The same
Hmm.
Totally.
things. But even, for our listeners who aren't new to the kitchen and Lisa, you kind of touched on this too of, quick and easy could be just going to what you know. Like a lot of times our dinners quick and easy is like just is eggs or like, I don't know, we've been doing tuna melts lately, right? Because it's easy, we know it, there's no thought. I don't need to go to a recipe. There's minimal risk of messing, a standard thing up. So sometimes basic can really, get that same impact if that's what you're trying to get out of it, is just, to plan meals. But both of you touched on things, and this is kind of, let's see if we've got some hacks for these ones. Lisa, you mentioned lots about, different types of equipment, which can also be, we can have lots of equipment, but it also can actually be a struggle of the overwhelmingness of like all the fancy tools and stuff that come up, buy this to do this. And it seems to end up, at the back of the cupboard, only used once type of equipment. So what's the hack for balancing, like how to know what equipment works and maybe what do we need it for?
Or it jams up your utensil drawer because you can't open it because you have too much crap in there. Oh,
Oh, the worst.
I hate
Oh,
that
The
so much.
worst.
And it's always
Yes.
the masher. It's always the masher.
Yes. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kitchen tools. I mean, you really want to just have your like kind of basic things that you need. I'm kind of not about the single use utensils and tools that are out there for like maybe they're handy for this one thing, but like certainly not a necessary thing you're going to use every day, or you can use something else to do the same thing. So like single use appliances and things like that, or tools. But if you just have like your kind of basic things that you need in the kitchen, it's surprising how much you can accomplish with that stuff. Like you might think, oh, I'm gonna have to get creative and work around recipes if it calls for this other thing. But then you find yourself, like, if you really think about it, you find yourself only returning to these basic things all the time anyways. Like I have quite a few tools in my kitchen, obviously. I have mostly the basic stuff and then a few more specialty items. And like even for me, some of the specialty items, like I don't even turn to very often. Even something like, this is so silly, but even something like a whisk, I almost never use my whisk. I use a fork for scrambled eggs still. Like it must be like, it's a pain to clean, and like maybe the size of mine, it's like just too big and like awkward. And so it's just stuff like that. It's like you don't need, I'm not saying not to get a whisk. Like, sure, that's a good kitchen tool to have. And that's more of a basic one. But like that's just an example of like a fork works just fine for, scrambled eggs. Maybe if you're making a cake or something a little bit more involved, you might need a whisk. So that's maybe whatever. That's just an example. But lots of the time, that applies to most things where it's people think, oh, I can't do this recipe because it calls for, to use this specific tool. Or I watched this cooking video, and this person had this tool and it looked so cool. Oh, I guess I can't make that because I don't have that. But most, like I'd say 99% of the time, there's something else you probably already have that's going to work just as well. So yeah, I wouldn't stress too much about getting all the necessary tools or excluding certain recipes or from your routine or from your repertoire because you don't have a really super specific tool. Like I don't have everything in my kitchen either. There's some things I just am like, I don't feel like I'm going to use that, or I can do it fine without. And you just figure out a way.
Oh, it's my whisk that's getting stuck in the cupboard
Yes.
door.
Oh
It's
yeah.
not the masher,
Oh,
it's
Yes.
the whisk.
yep. Or that classic, like I'm blanking on the name of it, but the utensil holder beside the stove, for me, because the whisk is so wide, and when you're putting stuff back into the utensil holder beside the stove, it gets caught in the whisk. And so if you pull one thing out, you end up pulling 5 things out. And if you're doing that while stuff is on the stove, you cook it, it's absolute mayhem.
Lungs like spring open in there and go flying. Yeah,
Um,
dangerous.
Yep.
but that actually speaks to another challenge, and I was telling Lisa about this before we started, is I actually had one of my clients talk about how important reorganizing their kitchen was to be successful in the kitchen, because to your point, if everything is kind of everywhere and getting stuck, like I'm the first person to be like I'm done. Like I'm not going to fight with tongs and whisks and stuff in the drawers. Like that's just a turn off for me in the kitchen. So organization apparently is something. So yeah, what are some hacks around that, Lisa? Because navigating a kitchen can be, well, depending on the size of the kitchen too, right? Like we've got to be very purposeful of what's in there.
Yeah, I mean, organization is huge. Like when I moved into this house, every house I've moved into, I always like look at how the kitchen is laid out, and I think about the utensils I reach for the most often and what kind of things I use for just base. Like it could be like, oh, I use this spatula all the time for flipping pancakes on the weekend. Like I make pancakes almost every weekend, let's say. I always use this one spatula for that, and I use it for also for this, and this. So that's something I use a lot. I want this in the drawer next to me right by the stove because I use that all the time. So like thinking through your frequency of use of certain items, like the things you reach for the most, like probably a silicone spatula, wooden spoon, your flipping spatula, things like that, or like things you're reaching for a lot, measuring spoons for baking, especially things like that, like having them nearby. So thinking about how you lay out your drawers and your like canisters and things like that around the things that you need in it, like to be reaching for frequently, and then just organizing your kitchen that way. And then some things that you don't use as often, maybe like let's say like a pastry blender or something, is like something I use once every 2 months probably. So that's not going to be sitting in the front of my drawer. That's going to be either in a totally separate place in my kitchen for like infrequently used items, or like it'll have its own designated spot somewhere else, but it's not going to be like the thing that's jamming up the whole drawer because at the front, because I'm not going to be reaching for that all the time. So thinking about frequency of use, what kind of meals you're making, and having those kinds of items close by to the appliance you're using as well. Like I have my cutlery drawer right next to my dishwasher. So when I'm unloading it, it goes right in, like right next to me. I don't have to carry it across the whole kitchen and balance all these forks and knives in my hand, like that kind of stuff, right? So, and then next to your stove, you have all of your implements for cooking, things that you're going to clearly make on the stove. And then maybe if you have like an island or a separate counter somewhere where you do baking, that's where you keep your dry measuring cups and your pastry blender, let's say, or whatever it is for those more like baking type activities. So it's like kind of organizing your little stations around how you use those spaces. And then that also gives you a chance to go through your tools, and maybe you're like, oh, I got this thing 15 years ago and I've used it twice. Maybe it's time to donate it. Maybe it's time to like cut back on some of these things that I have just had around forever and I don't use anymore. And that'll cut back on some of that clutter. And maybe you can open your drawer again if you're getting rid of some of those cluttery items. So stuff like that to think through, I think makes a huge difference.
Yeah. If you have the more tools and things that you have, the more that you're going to have to keep outside of cabinets. And if it's in a location where you can't protect it from dust, I'm thinking of numerous situations where I'm like, oh, I need to go use this one tool for this recipe, but you didn't account for the fact that you couldn't keep it in a cabinet. So now it's in kind of an open air location, maybe in a closet or a pantry or, something like this. And now you got to wash it before you use it because there's dust on it. Like, the more tools you have, the more, because if it's a tool that's multi-purpose, I love that part that you mentioned, because then you're going to be using it more often, less likely that that'll happen. I mean, it could be a niche problem for people with small kitchens. Like my kitchen's kind of small, doesn't have as much storage as what I would like. So that's a problem that I have. And it may be a problem for people that living in apartments and condos and things like that. The kitchen isn't large, so they have like a shelving unit beside their kitchen, in the space between the kitchen and the dining room, like the open shelving units and things like the wire racks or whatever else. And, that's not going to be protected by dust, very real thing. So the more you use it, the less likely that will happen. Because that's a frustrating, like, because you're never gonna, like, who thinks of that? Like, oh, I gotta clean the dust off my stuff before I use it.
I've totally had to do that a bunch of times too, like something in the canister next to my stove and I'm like, "Oh, I haven't used this in a while. I better like give it a quick wash," which is like frustrating in the moment when you're like, "I need it right this second." But yeah, those like storage shelving units and stuff, like you could always get little bins and stuff with lids if you want to organize stuff of like that you'd maybe use less often but want to protect from dust flying around and stuff. Then you can have it labeled as like, oh, here's some like specialty baking equipment, or here's some like whatever extra spatulas that are like my less favorite ones but I don't want to throw them out, kind of thing. And sort of have it organized that way if you have room. And then you can sort of create these modular storage solutions where it's like you can also stack the bins and stuff too, and that actually adds a ton of extra storage that way too. So yeah, there's definitely solutions for smaller spaces as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good hack for anybody listening to like assess your kitchen space. Is it working for you? Is there some room for improvement there? Like for some people that is just the hiccup, right? Is just the space and making the space work for it. So it's inviting too. I was talking to a client of, if it's not an inviting space, we're less likely to be creative in that space or want to try things because it just feels disorganized. So I think that is a really good tip. Okay. Lisa, as we kind of wrap up here, what would you say your like your top 5 favorite kitchen hacks would be? We haven't covered them already, but like, yeah, what would be top 5?
Okay, so are you talking about very specific things here, like things that I just do day to day that I've learned in my um, time in the kitchen, like very specific techniques? Or are you talking about like just more broad tips that I would have for just like being a more efficient cook in your kitchen? Like just I don't know which direction you want to go.
I would go the first one. Like, what are your yeah, we've covered
Okay.
broad things. So yeah, what if we were like your top 3 specific things?
Oh, man, I feel on the spot. It's so hard to choose like my favorite. I guess, okay, things that come to mind, like they're kind of boring things. Maybe people want like more exciting things. But
They won't be boring. They won't be boring because boring can be
Boring is often
good.
good.
Yeah, boring is good.
okay. Well, the first one that comes to mind for me is like I always have like a paper towel, like a wet paper towel or like a grippy thing under my cutting board every time I start in the kitchen. That's not really a hack, I guess, but that's just like something I always do. And you're taught that in cooking school, even. I mean, you can also get cutting boards that have like little grippy feet on them too. But if you have a wooden cutting board, they don't always sit perfectly flat, or if they're warped or whatever, they can move around on you. So I actually have like an extra piece of like kitchen roll, like that grippy stuff that you put in the bottom, like a liner that you put in your drawer. I had some extra, so I just cut like a little piece of that, and I just unroll that and use that under my cutting board. But like, yeah, a paper towel or like a cloth or something to stabilize your cutting board is nice, because it just like makes it so things aren't slipping and sliding around, and it's safer. So kind of a boring one, but that's just something I do every day that I'm just thinking about the way I cook. What else? One I always tell people about, I don't know why this comes to mind because it's not something I do every day, but I keep coming back to it. Peeling ginger with a spoon instead of like a vegetable peeler. Because if you think about the shape of like a ginger root, it's all like gnarly and has all these bumps and stuff. And the skin is so paper thin too that a peeler like actually takes off too much material. So the spoon, you can kind of like scrape off that papery skin and get around all those little like shapes. And then I peel it, cut it up into like little 1 inch pieces, throw it in a freezer bag. And I always keep my ginger frozen because it grates so much easier when it's frozen than when it's fresh. And also you buy a big ginger root and you're never going to use the whole amount before it goes bad in your fridge. So that's kind of like also a food waste reducing tip too. Like ginger is always one I return to. And actually, I guess I'm going to just expand that tip out a little bit. So this freezing technique, that's what I do for a lot of ingredients. So like tomato paste, you get a big can of that. I always like use what I need for the recipe, and then I measure out like tablespoon-ish amounts on a little baking sheet with like either parchment or wax paper or whatever. Throw that in the freezer, and then you just collect them all off the pan when they're frozen, put them in a bag. I also freeze buttermilk in like 1 cup measurements, so that because I only use it for baking, you're not drinking it. So you just thaw it in the microwave, or if you take it out the day before and put it in the fridge or whatever. It's First of all, it's measured out probably in the amount you're going to need. Like pancakes, you probably are going to use like a cup of it anyway. But buttermilk also doesn't last as long as you think it is going to in the fridge. Like you buy a liter of it and you think, oh, buttermilk is going to last forever. And then you look at the best before date and it's like around the same amount of time that like regular milk would go bad. So, and that's not something you use all the time. So just stuff like that around, like your freezer is really your best friend with these kinds of ingredients and portioning out. So sorry, that was like a tip that was like 7 tips in one, but it really came down to like portioning things out in the freezer and saving them for later. Also a time saving thing, really.
I love that. I also didn't know about buttermilk, which drives me crazy because I can't buy it in a small enough container sometimes. And so look at that. As a person who is very confident in the kitchen, I would not have put that together. So something not thought of. That's actually very helpful, which is really good.
Yeah, I actually only started doing this like a year or two ago myself. It just came to me that I was like you don't normally freeze milk because it'll kind of the texture gets a little weird for drinking. Still perfectly safe, but I could see how it looks off-putting maybe. But like buttermilk, you're just adding it to your baking, so who cares? So yeah, that one has also been a huge life changer for me. Okay, so that's like 2, but also it was like 7. What else? One thing I always do is I always use either a little drop of oil or some nonstick cooking spray or whatever you have in your measuring cups or your measuring spoons if you're measuring something sticky like honey or molasses, because then it just comes right out. It doesn't stick. You're not scraping it out with a spatula and trying to get every last bit out, and then it's a messy, sticky situation. It all comes out, and you don't need to it's not like a ton of oil you're putting in there. It's just like a tiny little amount to just coat the inside. That's just a little hack. Maybe people have already heard of that one, but it really helps. If you're measuring something like honey or molasses, really helps to get it all out. So that one comes to mind as well. Let's see. What else? I guess this is a common one that people have probably heard of, but if you're cutting a large amount of something like grape tomatoes or grapes or something, and you want to slice them in half to do a large amount at a time, you can put them between like two deli lids for like deli container lids, like those plastic circular lids, and just put them all on there, and then take your knife and slice through all of them at once, and then you're kind of getting through a whole bunch at a time. You do need a sharp knife for this, so if you don't have a sharp knife, make sure it's sharp because it won't slice through otherwise. But that does save a bit of time. Like instead of one at a time, slicing through one little cherry tomato at a time, that saves on time if you're trying to do a bunch at once. So that's one I've seen a lot, and I agree it does save a little bit of time and it makes it more efficient. These are like super specific tips, and it's not necessarily something I do every day, but they have helped me.
But it does go to show you that like a few hacks can actually, like if I think about even the oil one, right? Like I ran into that last week, whatever I was making. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I got to dirty a spatula and another spoon. And I just like made a mess on the counter and it just fed into that, my husband saying, "Why do you make such a mess?" I'm like, "I don't know." So that one would have came in handy if I had just thought about that and reduced. So I think any sort of hack that helps you in the kitchen is very important. Brandon, what about for you? What would you say your like, I don't know, two favorite hacks are?
Mine are a little bit is slightly different. One of my things that I always despise is dishes. Just yeah, I I don't have a good relationship with dishes. Um, but I know myself that I'm not always going to be gung ho to like clean up right afterwards. But I know the stuff from experience that will dry on and be 100 times harder to clean afterwards, or I'll have to soak it for an hour. So like, yeah, I'm not gonna clean this right away. Give it a little rinsey rinse before you put it on the counter to come back to later. If you scooping rice out of a pot after you're done cooking rice, dried on rice is probably also dangerous too, because like I've legit almost cut myself with dried on rice on a wooden spoon. Give it a little rinsey rinse. You don't have to like do, and sometimes that little like, oh, I'm just gonna rinse this off, come back to it later, will sometimes be the little flick of the dominoes to get you going to actually maybe do the dishes right afterwards. Who knows? But the same goes for like pots and whatever else. Um, so that the stuff dry on, it makes cleaning it up later just a lot easier. Um, I, funny enough, I can't remember which episode this was that Lisa, that we had you on. This was, I don't know, this was last year sometime, and we were talking about another episode about similar tips, and one of the things you talked about was having all the ingredients that you're going to use for a recipe available and even maybe measured out, ready to go. So when you go to cook the thing on the stove, because let's yeah, when I'm making a recipe, and a lot of the clients, they have ADHD, they get distracted easily. That's just how it is. If you're cooking something on a stove, the risk of burning something goes up drastically if you have to find the things you're trying to put together in the recipe while something is already started cooking on the stove. So the term, I always butcher this. What's it called? Because you're going to pronounce this way better than me.
Mise en place. Yes, and I was trying to avoid talking about this because I won't shut up about it. If I talk about mise en place, I could talk about it for the entire episode, and I did talk about it in one of our previous episodes a lot, but like that would, if I could choose my top kitchen hack, that would be it. But I specifically was like, I'm not going to say it because I always say it. I'm getting so repetitive at this point. But truly, and that's a time saver. And another like thing that's a misconception is that people think it's going to take them longer in the kitchen if they prep their ingredients ahead instead of doing it as they go. Because you think in your brain, you're thinking, oh, it's an efficiency thing. While that's cooking on the stove, I can be chopping this and saving time. But it actually is like the opposite. It feels like that's not going to be the case, but it actually does save you time to prep everything and have it lined up and ready to go. And then you're organized, you're calm, you're not panicking, you're not keeping your mind in two places at once. And then, yeah, and then if you burn the onions, guess what? You just lost all that time and you have to start all over. You have to chop the onion again. You have to maybe wash your pan. You have to cook those onions another time. So, like, you can lose a bunch of time by trying to be too efficient and multitask. So mise en place for sure is like, if you're going to take anything away from any of my episodes, that is the number one thing for sure.
Yeah, because it's a stress reliever to not have to worry about like cutting something or rinsing it, because like that is risky business when you're cooking something and you're pouring, you're measuring, you're chopping, because one wrong move, like, oh, you spilled something on the ground that you have to now clean up. What do you do? Absolute, I'm going to use again, absolute mayhem. And like, you got to turn the stove off because you don't want to burn it, and then you got to go clean the thing up, which means you have to reheat the pan again. Like, nah, have your stuff set out. If you have at least 50% of it set out, I never realized how much grumpier I was if I don't do that when I'm done cooking. I'm just an absolute like grumpy person. I'm trying to avoid certain words. Yeah.
I'm the same way. And you have to, like, you'll be surprised at how much more you enjoy cooking, and you're going to be more motivated to keep doing it and expanding your skills if you set up your environment to keep you in a mental space that's a little bit calmer. Lots of people don't like cooking because they think of cooking as panic time. I'm just running around the kitchen like a chicken with my head cut off. My head is in 16 different places at once. You have kids asking you for things. There's pets running around. Like, it's mayhem, like you said. And that is like a huge deterrent for people getting into the kitchen. So, like, having that mise en place in place puts you in like a way better mental place and makes you 1,000 times more likely to have success in your recipe. Mistakes are bound to happen when you're not prepped ahead and you're like trying to keep your mind in three places at once. So there's going to be mistakes that happen then, and then you're going to feel like a failure and feel like, oh, I messed up this recipe, I can't do it. But if you have all your ingredients out, I can guarantee you're going to have a way higher chance of success with your whatever dish you're making or recipe you're making. And then that's just going to help you build your confidence. So really, really important.
I could keep blabbing about it too, but yeah, we'll leave it
That
there with that one.
So for our listeners, if this is like, oh, I'm really excited about this and want to learn more, yeah, definitely check out our last episode with Lisa, who touches on this. I actually forgot that it had a name, but I think that is a skill whether you're new into kitchen, like into cooking, or if you've been around in the kitchen for a while and it's a new recipe, like even one that I did this week, like instead of having to go back to the recipe, double check, triple check, I did everything ahead of time. So then it's a less back and forth. It was a little bit more calmer. So I think that is, yeah, we touched on a lot of really great stuff today. So I'm pumped. So as always, for anybody who's listening, yeah, share with us your kitchen hacks. We would love to hear from you on, yeah, what you're doing, what you're learning about. I know there's tons of interesting trendy stuff out there too that we didn't even touch on that could be good too. So leave some comments, share with somebody who you think might benefit from listening to this as well. But as always, thank you for joining us today on A Plate Full of Insights, and we'll see you next time.